when there's two sides to every coin. Then there's a conversation you can join. But I'm an old dog and there's new tricks. And some of my opinions you just can't fix. 'Cause I'm an old man yelling at the sky. I'ma shake my fist at the clouds and cry. Get off my lawn, you snowflake, before I have a meltdown, breakdown, shakedown. 'Cause this is my hometown, so back down, sports clown. It's all just a game, and it's the last down, let down, cowtown. I said it's all just a game. I give the touchdown, the rundown, the lowdown. 'Cause it's over the game, gonna crack down, and shut down, the sundown. I said it's all just a game.
Hey kids, welcome to the old program. Glad you could be with us. It's a Wednesday afternoon. You picked the right program, that's for sure. Peter Maher, our NHL insider, will be here, our Flames insider, as well. Vicki Hall will join us too. She of the CFL Hall of Fame, or soon to be of the CFL Hall of Fame. Lots to talk about with Vicki, lots to talk about with Peter. First of all, welcome. How the heck are you? I forgot to do this last time. I better throw it on there as well, because we are an all-inclusive podcast. Everybody is welcome here. We are broadcasting live from Treaty 7 territory. What else do you need to know? Well, I'm glad you're here. I hope this doesn't take you away from other plans or important things, or maybe you're just listening in the background, which is absolutely the way you should go about this. Appreciate it. It's kind of a weird show I wouldn't say weird show, fun show, I think, on Monday with Cammie. Got into a lot about Craig Conroy and some other things. Mentioned that the Calgary, so we were talking about the Calgary Surge, and I am working for the Surge, so we'll throw that out there. Everybody needs to know that, so that you're making educated choices when you choose to believe what you believe from me. If you choose to believe nothing, that's all right too. But the Surge winning again last night, 85-82. Second home game. The target score was 84. At one point, Niagara was up 82 to 77 or 76, something like that. And the Surge were able to hold them off and ended up getting a point up on them. A couple of free throws, missed both, but got the rebounds and scored and won. And I got to tell you, I was hanging out in the lobby when people were leaving, and it was just so much fun. It felt like a playoff game. It was just exciting to watch people get excited and get loud about sports. So the next game for the Surge is, I think, a week from Friday. They'll be back at home. So if you haven't checked it out, let me give a plug to them, and certainly be paying attention to the things we're doing in the community, because we are going to help grow the game of basketball in Calgary. And I'm very, very excited about that. The big news, dare I say, in the hockey world, and it has reverberations and ramifications in our neck of the woods. And that is ex-general manager of the Calgary Flames, Brad Treliving, who essentially walked away from the team at the end of the year, said enough is enough for moi. Some speculated that it had to do with the coaching. Some speculated it had to do with he was just burnt out. Who knows? But today he finds himself now as the general manager of the Toronto Maple Leafs. I'm ecstatic for Brad. Again, I've got to give you all these full disclosures. You need to know who you're hearing this information from. And Brad's a friend of mine, and I have a lot of time for Brad Treliving. He's taught me a lot. He's really, really helped me a lot with projects in the community, especially around leadership. I thought during his time here, he did some pretty cool things. I think he was put in some difficult positions. Did he make some mistakes? Absolutely. But I think he learned from those mistakes. But you won't find a harder worker. You won't find a more respected person in hockey, I don't think. And I think the Toronto Maple Leafs and their fans are now about to have a little bit of a curveball thrown at him because he's a little bit more dynamic than Kyle Dubas publicly and maybe some of the other recent GMs. I don't think he'll be as combative as Brian Burke, but he's going to be an interesting guy to watch in Toronto. A lot of pressure on that team. Obviously, they have their own set of decisions to make. Will they free up cap room by moving one of their quote unquote big four? And I'm sure when we get into it with our first guest, we'll try to drill right down and find out when the first blockbuster Calgary-Toronto trade will be made. Because I believe there's a little history there. I believe there might be a little history. So without further ado, brought to you by Ski Cellar Snowboard, skicellarsnowboard.com, 76 years in Calgary. Currently just the one location open for the summer. The other three will come back in the fall. But if you want to check them out, please do. McLeod Trail by Chinook Center. All of your warm weather needs or cold weather needs in this warm weather is what I meant to say. And if you want to start spying the new technology for next fall, maybe what you want to get, maybe you want to save your shekels this summer so that you can get the latest snowboard, skis, or maybe you can save some shekels this summer by getting your next snowboard or skis. Check them out. Ski Cellar Snowboard, skicellarsnowboard.com. The great one, Peter Maher, nobody more excited that Rod Stewart will be in town. I have no idea of the plans of the former voice of the Edmonton Oilers, Rod Phillips, but I do know that Rod Stewart is coming to town, and nobody more excited than our next guest, Peter Maher. I buggered that one up, didn't I?
Indeed so. That's going to be a real big night on August the 17th in the Scotiabank Saddledome. Looking forward to it. I think it'll be the 18th concert I've seen Rod in.
I was just going to ask you how many have you, and you've seen them all in Calgary, right? Like you've seen, since you've come to Calgary, you haven't missed a Rod Stewart show in Calgary?
No, there were a couple in Calgary I missed because it was on the road with the Flames at the time those concerts were held. But
Gotcha.
Other than that, all the ones that he had here I saw. And I believe this is going to be his 15th appearance in the Saddledome.
Wow.
And no other performer has had more concerts in the Saddledome than Rod Stewart. And the very first time I saw him was the very first time he was here, which was back in 1983, I believe, or 84, when the Saddledome, soon after the Saddledome had opened. And that's when I became a big Rod Stewart fan. My son, Jeff, and my daughter, Tricia, got tickets for Nancy and I to go to the concert. We went, and that's when I became a Rod Stewart fan. And other times I've seen him on the road, just a couple of times, just by chance. The Flames happened to be in the city the night before a game, and he had a concert. One of them was in Montreal, another one was in Carolina. So sometimes it was the luck of the draw. Other times there was some good planning made to get there.
Pete, do we know what catalog he's working out of for this tour?
What she's working out of what again, Rod? Sorry.
Which catalog of songs? Which do we know what he's singing on this tour?
Only the hits.
Oh, just hits, eh?
Just the hits. Yep, just the hits.
Right.
So,
all right.
I'm looking forward to that.
Not like you're counting down the days or anything.
No, but I've got it marked on the calendar.
Well, Pete, we haven't talked.
He was in Prince Edward Island. I don't know, maybe 5 or 6, 7, 8 years ago, and he was at an outdoor show there. And I had some friends of mine, being from the Maritimes, wondering if I was going to go to that concert. And I decided, no, I'm not going to. I'd already made my trip down the east that year, and as it turned out, it was raining that day, so I was glad I wasn't there, because I probably wouldn't have been protected from all the rain. But anyway, that's a little sidelight. So it would have been 20 times if I'd have gone there then.
Well, who knows how many? We don't know how many it's going to end up yet, Pete, because neither of you guys are done.
Yep.
Boy, it's been a while, almost a month since you and I have talked on this program. We turned you over to the careful hands of Danny Austin a couple of weeks ago.
And Tammy Tempe as well was on that day.
That's right. That's right. So you were
and
taking.
She brought up the Maritimes that day, so that's how it got referred to on that particular occasion.
a lot has transpired, but let's stick with the two general managers, and we'll go chronologically, I suppose, and go backwards. Let's start with today. And you heard me talk about it off the top. Brad Treliving, the new general manager of the Toronto Maple Leafs, and he's a friend of mine. I really like Brad. I think it's a daunting task whenever you take over that team. What do you make of the news today?
I think it's great for Brad. I mean, I think he did a really good job here, considering some of the circumstances that he had to deal with, and now that he's landed on his feet and back in the general manager's chair in Toronto, it's outstanding. I don't know Brad nearly as well as you got to know him, Rod, but when I did see him, be around him, he was always engaging, always helpful. If I needed anything, just ask him, and he would make it work. And if I needed anything and that type of thing. So, and looking at the work that he did, I thought he did a very good job in his 9 years that he was GM of this Flame hockey team. And, it was really interesting. There was some speculation of him going to Toronto way back in January, which was, really interesting, because at that time, Kyle Dubas was still looked like firmly in the chair in Toronto, and Brad firmly in the chair with the Flames. But things do change sometimes in a hurry. And in this particular case, Kyle Dubas is out in Toronto, and Brad is out in Calgary, but now he's in Toronto. So I think he's going to do a wonderful job. And I think one of the key reasons that he got the job was his work ethic, and some of the history that he's had in Arizona and in Calgary and Arizona, where he's assistant general manager. And also, I think the fact that he's worked in a Canadian market was a big plus getting Toronto, because he knows at least somewhat what it's like working in a Canadian market. Although I think he'll find Toronto's market a little bit tougher from a public standpoint than he experienced here in Calgary. But I'm sure that he'll get through that all right without any real major problems. He's that type of person.
There's a couple of things about him that intrigue me with this particular job. And one is that they're not unlike Calgary in the sense that they have some decisions to make and some contracts, not necessarily on the front burner, but we know now that the front burner's been moved up by a year. You can't really wait on things. Pete, he's a little bit of would you call him, the old school term was riverboat gambler. And I know the Flames tend to be risk adverse. They don't like to take a lot of risks, but Brad would take risks, wouldn't he?
Yeah, he would. And so it's going to be real interesting. And I think the very first case he has to deal with is with Matthews. His contract, he can sign a new contract by July 1. And if he decides that he doesn't want to sign a contract there, they've got to move him, and they've got to move him, fairly quick and get a great return for him. So that, to me, is the number one decision. Well, I guess the number one decision really he has to make is he's going to make a coaching change with the Maple Leafs. That situation's been up in the air ever since Kyle Dubas left. In fact, was up in the air even before he left. So I think that's the first decision he'll have to make. And I think he has to do that relatively quick, because then he has to turn his attention to Auston Matthews and see if he can get him signed to a contract extension. That'll make him a Leaf for a long, long time. Otherwise, he has to move him. Otherwise, he'll lose him and get nothing for him. And as you mentioned, they've got those top four guys, all very solid hockey players, but it eats up about half of their payroll. And so if he's going to give Matthews a raise, it's not going to be into effect for the upcoming season, but it's going to come up into effect for future seasons down the road. So, yeah, that's a real major hurdle that he's going to have to deal with right away with the agent for Matthews, and sit down and have a chat with him as well.
Isn't it interesting in a way, Peter, that it's going to be kind of intriguing to watch Brad and the decisions that he makes just on the coach and Matthews? He inherited Bob Hartley. He kept Bob Hartley, right? Now, eventually he moved on, but he could have taken that opportunity and moved on from Bob Hartley when he took over, but he didn't. And he's got that same decision to make now. I wonder how that might influence, or if it influences. And the other one is just a year ago is Johnny Gaudreau walking away. A lot of people are, very, I suppose, critical of that decision. I think we all know why it happened. The intent, the heart was there, but this is a business. I wonder how cold and calculated he will be with Matthews.
And certainly he's going to have a different approach to it than having gone through that experience last year with Johnny Gaudreau. And he was pretty well shocked the night before that he wouldn't sign on with the Flames and decided he was going to become a free agent. And I think he was shocked by that, because he was pretty certain that Johnny was going to re-sign here with the Flames. In fact, which we'll get to shortly, when Craig Conroy announced as general manager of the Flames, one of the first things he said is, we're not going to experience another Johnny Gaudreau situation as we did here last year. So, and that, of course, is going to be firmly on the mind of Brad. as he goes about his business now in Toronto. And the other thing is, I'm sure that Matthews is going to know who's going to be coach of the team. That's going to be all part and parcel of trying to sit down and get him to negotiate a contract extension. So these are decisions that can't wait for forever to be handled. So he's going to keep the same coach, then well, that's fine. You go ahead with that. And but if you're thinking of bringing in somebody else, then you're pretty much going to have to tell Matthews who that guy is before he can make a decision, because I'm sure that is going to be something that will weigh on his decision as to whether to stay in Toronto or consider moving on to another location. Many people say that since he's from Arizona that he'll end up going there, but I'm sure he wants to win a Stanley Cup, and the chances of Arizona winning a Stanley Cup in the near future are pretty much null and void. And in fact, it may be null and void period, because they could be moving away from the Phoenix, Arizona area in the near future. So,
sure.
But there's lots of other teams that I'm sure will have an interest in Matthews if he becomes available.
Well, and let's be perfectly honest, a lot of people speculated that Johnny Gaudreau would end up with the New Jersey Devils or the Philadelphia Flyers, because that's where he was from. But as we know, that
right,
didn't
exactly.
happen. So sometimes those lines don't get drawn quite as straight as we think they do.
Well, the situation, though, in Philadelphia was they didn't have any room under the cap to sign him.
Nope.
But then the second alternative would have been New Jersey. But they had the money, and it didn't appear as though they made a very much of an effort to get him either. So, so you just never know about these things. You're right. Yeah.
Pete, we talked about this 6 weeks ago when Brad walked away, and he did. He was offered a contract extension. He didn't take it. You mentioned it's kind of the first time that's ever happened, with the Flames. How different, and I know it's been a while since you worked there, but you've still got ties there. How different is working for MLSE as opposed to working for CSEC, do you think? Do you think that Brad's going to notice a difference?
Well, if you're reading some of the comments that Kyle Dubas made, and they're reading a bit in between the lines on that, when he was in that GM position, there seemed to be he wanted the structure changed there. That there were too many scenarios you had to go through in order for a decision to be made. And when you look back at that, whether I'm sure Brad saw those comments or heard those comments and brought those up with Shanahan when he was talking to him about the job. But apparently the way things kind of go is that the GM comes up with, a decision to make a trade or sign or whatever, then it has to go through Shanahan. Shanahan has to take it to the owners, and there's three separate groups there. There's Rogers owns part of that, Bell owns part of that, and then there's another group that has another small share in it. And apparently all of that has to be approved by these people before some of these things can become law, if you will. And I know Dubas seemed to indicate he didn't like that. And that was one of the things he wanted to change if he was going to stay there. So I'm sure that was addressed in the meetings that Brad Treliving had with Shanahan. But whether or not any of that gets changed, I don't know. When you look at CSEC, I'm sure that there are no major decisions that are made within the Flames that are not have to go through ownership of the team.
Sure.
I mean, I'm sure last year when Daryl Sutter got his 2-year contract extension, that ultimately he won't work now, but he'll get paid. I'm sure that had to be approved by Murray Edwards, the premier owner of the Flames. And I'm sure that any other major deals have to go through him as well, and the other owners on the team. It's interesting. It goes back to a couple of years ago when Brad was GM at the trade deadline. There was I don't know how factual it is because I wasn't there, but I did hear about it, that there was a trade in the works with Minnesota, I believe, for Jason Zucker coming to the Flames. And Brad couldn't get a hold of Murray Edwards to approve of that trade before the trade deadline, so the trade didn't go through. So I'm sure he had that experience right there where his hands were tied on a deal that he wanted to make, and he would take that into consideration when he's talking with the Maple Leafs. So, when you're spending the kind of money you spend on contracts for hockey players and coaches and that in this day and age in the NHL, you pretty much have to go through ownership to get their approval on these things. And these owners are involved in a whole lot of other business aspects because they've got a lot of money, and the reason they have a lot of money is because they work hard and they make good deals. So sometimes they are not able to find within a couple of seconds when you need an answer. So that will be interesting to see how that unfolds as time goes on in Toronto.
That trade, by the way, or that proposed trade was Mike Russo from The Athletic wrote about it here this past year. So that one kind of came to light. One last one, Pete, and then we got to move to the locals because, again, big story there too. But it's easy to hate on the Maple Leafs being a Western Canadian. It's easy to get mad at, the coverage on, Sportsnet and TSN and everything. And I get that. And I'm not trying to curry anybody's favor or change anybody's mind. But you said it before, Pete. Like, Brad saw what was going on with Kyle Dubas. He knows what a hotbed market it is. What's the attraction for a hockey person to take a job there? Why bother? Why be part of this monstrous organism that seems so difficult to tame? What's the allure of leading that team?
Well, to me, Rob, the thing is the challenge of it. And if you end up having success with that challenge, you're going to be a hero in Toronto forever.
Yeah.
Now, the Maple Leafs haven't won a Stanley Cup since 1967.
Right.
And so if you can go in there as a general manager or as a coach and get that team to perform to a point where they go the full route and win a Stanley Cup, I mean, you can live in Toronto and never have to buy a meal again. It's that kind of situation. I mean, it's a situation in Calgary is similar, but not as widespread as Toronto. I mean, it's massive there. What kind of appreciation you can get if you have a championship team like the Raptors and the Blue Jays when they were winning, going back a few decades, and then the Raptors, of course, a few years ago. I mean, those guys are all still being cherished and bowed upon in Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
So and those teams are not the big team in Toronto. The Maple Leafs have always been Toronto's biggest team, and they've gone so long without winning. You can just imagine what kind of an explosion it would be if they won the Cup. I mean, my granddaughter lives in Toronto, and the night they won that first round playoff series this year, she was at home and she could hear the horns honking out in the street all night as the people were celebrating one series win. So you can imagine if you win a Stanley Cup, and if you're the general manager of that team, say Brad Treliving, then there's great appreciation for that, and I think that's the challenge of being a general manager, a coach, or even a player in Toronto. The other side of that is when you don't have success, then they come on you very, very hard. I think even more so in Toronto than they would here in Calgary, because they're just massive with the media attention you get there when you're winning or losing.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's that whole idea of if you can do it, they'll build monuments to you.
But look at Doug Gilmour. He played here for the Flames. He scored 2 goals the night the Flames won the Stanley Cup, and the game-winning goal included in that. And, he was a big star here. He goes to Toronto and he becomes 4 times the star that he was in Calgary. So, that's just an example of a player, what the difference can make. Yeah, which is something we can touch on it a little bit here, because it's not the first time that a Flame general manager has gone from here to Toronto.
No, and that name Gilmour actually is kind of part of that too. But I think we'd be remiss if we didn't jump in, because you and I have not had a chance to speak. I go all the way back to when his playing career was winding down. It always felt like it was a fait accompli that Craig Conroy would go from playing to the broadcast booth, and he'd be the greatest. He'd be the Shaquille O'Neal or the Charles Barkley of hockey. He was just, that was the destiny that we all had preordained for Craig Conroy, but he chose to go a different path, Pete. And, he was named the general manager of the Calgary Flames last week. Somebody joked to me that he found out on the Friday before the long weekend, and it must have been the most excruciating 3 days of his life because he couldn't tell anybody. But I'm so happy for him. We know him really well. We got to know him as a player and as a manager. It was the right pick all along, but just a thought on Craig getting that job.
Well, I think the Flames did the right thing by talking to a whole lot of people with regard to that job, both internally and externally. As I mentioned when we were on about a couple of weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, I mentioned it was very important for them to talk to as many people outside of the organization and get their feel on the Flames before they make a final decision. And they went through all of that at pace. Don Maloney, along with John Bean, the president CEO of the Flames, going through that. And the fact that in the end they determined that Craig Conroy was the man for that job tells you that they are the only 2 people that could have known what kind of work Craig Conroy was doing. We all know about his characteristics being so outstanding, a great personable guy, a good PR guy, a hardworking guy, but only the people behind the scenes know what an assistant general manager has been doing. And Maloney and Bean obviously saw a lot of that. They saw a lot of that with Craig and felt he was the guy for the job. So, and that tells you how much work he's done behind the scenes, because when there's a trade, when there's a free agent signing, when there's a drafting, the guy that's in the forefront is the general manager. There's a lot of work being done underneath the general manager in the front office, but the people that are involved there don't get any public notice for that. It only is an internal thing. So that tells me that those people felt Craig was the guy for the job, and I felt all along that he was the guy for the job without knowing, exactly the inner workings that he had provided for them in the 9 years he was in that chair. I'll never forget, he had retired as a player after playing 1,000 games. And after his first game, and then of course he was hired on as management with the Flames by the late Ken King. And I remember Fred talking to him after the first game that he went to while he was in the managerial position with the Flames. He said he'd gone in and talked to the coaches after the game, and he came out and he said, "Boy, this is a whole different experience than it was when I was a player." So he had his eyes open right away as to what it was like to be a manager, and when they go in doing their assessment of players and that sort of thing. So he's seen it all as a player, and then now he's seen an awful lot of it all from behind the scenes. And I think he'll do an outstanding job as general manager. I think it was also a very good move to bring Dave Nonis in as an assistant general manager. He's got general managing experience in Vancouver and Toronto, and that vast knowledge certainly is going to be helpful to help guide Craig along with his job. And as I was saying earlier, the big thing that I took out of his first news conference and several other interviews that he's done since then is that they're not going to make the same mistake that they made with Johnny Gaudreau and not get something for him. Not going to lose a player and not get something for him. So right now, I think his big job is finding a coach. And then he's got to sit down with those 7 Flame players, including Elias Lindholm and Michael Backlund and a few others there. Sit down with them and find out whether or not they're willing to sign long-term with this team, because all of the 7 players that they have contracts are out at the end of this coming season, and they can't afford to let this one get through the cracks as they did with Johnny. And to me, if they can't get a deal done with him before the start of this season, then you got to move him right away. Some people would say, well, wait till the deadline. Maybe you get something for them. The problem is, if you get to the deadline and the team is having a good year and a good position in standing and a chance of having a good run in the playoffs, and you start moving some of these players and you kill the chemistry on the team. Yep. And so, it's got to be done now if that is the decision that they're going to make. So Craig's going to have his hands full, but I'm sure that he'll handle it very well. And, the interview process for the coach will be an interesting one, because as we all know, Craig's a very talkative guy. And if he's going to talk to 30 coaches, that's probably going to take up about 400 hours of his time to get all that sorted out.
And there's the famous story when they hired Glenn Gulletson, that he went out to Vancouver and they did the grouse grind. They went for the run up the mountain.
That's right.
And that was,
I forgot about that.
Yeah. But to that end, Pete, and I do want to get back to the players, because I want to ask you a specific question about those players, but to Craig Conroy, and I don't know, maybe it's because I'm a friend of his and I'm a little defensive about it. I thought a lot was made about him smiling and wanting it to be fun, and I thought it got painted in a way that wasn't fair necessarily to Craig, and I'm not trying to present him as some sort of devious mastermind or madman, but the dog's got some bite. Like, he is, he's a very competitive guy. And, yes, he wants it to be fun, and yes, he wants it to be lighter, but not at the expense of winning.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, most people have only they see him on the ice playing hockey and when he was playing. And when you meet him, I mean, he's bubbly and he's upbeat and positive and all that sort of thing. But I've also seen him have some very down moments, and he has that edge to him. And I think that's going to be a necessary thing in a general manager's position. And I have no doubt that he will apply that when that is necessary. Publicly, maybe anytime you see him, it may all be kind of a bubbly type of situation and positive with him. That's just the character that he is. Yep. But when it comes to making decisions and handling people, I think you're going to see him have that edge to him that you and I have seen from him from time to time in different kind of situations when he was a player, and then not even when he had retired afterwards. And so I think that people portraying him being just a happy-go-lucky guy are not getting the true read on who Craig Conroy is.
Right. You mentioned the 7 players, Pete, and that's kind of hanging out there. One that he has specifically talked about is Elias Lindholm. I believe, and I apologize because we were talking about this on Monday, and I said, well, they've got nobody else up the middle. My apologies. Nazem Kadri can play center. It does play center. But I do feel like you need to have a number 1 center, and that without Sean Monahan around here and without one of the young guys being that, I think it puts more emphasis on keeping Lindholm.
Yes, indeed. There's no question about that. He's a guy that he has to be the number 1 guy from that group of 7 players that you focus on and try to get him signed. And the way he departed, of course, when he departed and all the other players departed, Daryl Sutter was still coach of the team, and I think there was a faction of the players there that were not happy being around Daryl and Daryl as coach and that sort of thing. But of course, that's all been wiped out now, and so they've got a new GM and there's going to be a new coach. And I think that's going to be the important part, as I was saying earlier. I think they've got to hire the coach first before they can get a definitive conclusion with regard to Lindholm and some of those other guys that are in that situation, because they're not going to want to commit unless they know who the coach is and have a pretty good idea what type of coach he is and whether or not that it's somebody they can work with in a satisfactory manner. Now, not all, coaches and players don't get along 100%, but if there's a big situation where there's a huge void between the coach and the player, then, you've got to have somebody in there that the coach the player rather can respect. So I think, they have to, there's no harm in talking to those guys now, but I don't think you can get a final decision from any of them until you've got a head coach in place for this season. And so, to me, that has to happen before July 1 for sure. It doesn't really have to happen before the draft, but it certainly has to happen fairly soon here. And I'm sure that's what Craig is focusing on this week for the most part, is getting in touch with the many coaching candidates that are out there to see if get a little bit of a read on them to get things started with regard to the process of getting a coach hired here.
How do you handicap it? And I'll say this by saying that, traditionally, if you get rid of a hard-ass coach, you usually bring in a player's coach. And I think the Flames have been guilty of going back and forth on that. Gerard Gallant is an interesting name, not one that I would have brought up myself, but because he's out there, I thought that was the problem with the Rangers, was that Gallant and his players this year kind of fell off the same page. So it's a little interesting for me to hear his name out there.
Yeah, Gerard Gallant, I've got all the respect in the world for Gerard. I know him personally. He's a Maritimer from Prince Edward Island. And, he got 2 100-point seasons with the Rangers, this past one and the one before that. Yep. And still they ended up firing him after getting eliminated from the first round of the playoffs this year, which was really kind of hard to fathom when you think he had 100-point seasons twice during the regular season, and the Rangers stepped in and let him go after they had their exit interviews with players. Management did, that is, and decided he wasn't the guy to be their coach. It was a little bit puzzling there. And, of course, he was let go very quickly also when he was coaching Florida. He was also let go rather quickly when he was coaching in Las Vegas. So I don't know what all the situations were there, but he's a guy that's got a pretty good coaching record in the regular season in the NHL. And he also coached Jonathan Huberdeau for a full season with the Florida Panthers. And, of course, Huberdeau is a player they have to get back on track this year. When he starts out on this 8-year contract that pays him $10.5 million a year. So, that to me, that's why that might make him a candidate for the job. Now, Andrew Brunette, I think, was probably considering as well, but he, of course, signed yesterday to a new coaching, getting a new coaching position in Nashville. And he's a guy that coached Huberdeau when he had that big 115-point season 2 years ago with the Florida Panthers. So, but Gerard Gallant, the fact that he's been around and he's had the success would make him a candidate for this job here with the Flames. And I'm sure that they'll interview him. Whether or not he ends up being the coach, be another thing. But he certainly does have regular season credentials. Let's put it that way. Not so much in the playoffs, but does have regular season credentials. And, another name that popped into all this that kind of surprised me was Mark Savard, who was a player here with the Flames back in the early 2000s and a line mate with Jerome McGinley. And he's had some success coaching with Windsor in the Ontario Hockey League the last 2 seasons of junior play. Now, that's the only head coaching experience he's had. But his name coming up in there is a little bit of surprise, although Greg Conroy knows him, obviously, and Jerome McGinley's name has been attached as a guy that at some point could be joining the Flames organization in a managerial position. So he would probably have some good things to say about Mark, who won a Stanley Cup, or at least was a member of the Boston Bruins when they won the Stanley Cup in 2011. Although he didn't play, he had some concussion issues that forced him to end his NHL career earlier than he would have liked. But that was a bit of a surprise name that comes up. He never coached as a head coach in professional hockey. He was assistant coach with the St. Louis Blues there for a couple of seasons, going back to 2017, 2018. So, but I'm sure there's a whole bunch of other people that they're going to be talking to with regard to this job, including a bunch of people internally and externally. Now they've got some very solid people internally that. Names have been popped up quite regularly here in the media and social media and elsewhere. And my only concern with regard to internally is I go back to the 2006-2007 season. Mm-hmm. It was the year after Darryl had stepped away from coaching the Flames and then was concentrating only on the general manager's position. He had been the GM and coach for a while there. So he appointed Jim Playfair as the head coach of the Flames for that season. And I thought Jim was an excellent coach. Yep. The problem that existed there was that when Darryl was the coach, Jim was the assistant or the associate coach. And when Darryl was bashing the players, it was Jim that had to come in and build them up again by patting them on the back and that type of deal. So then when Jim came in as the head coach of the team, he had to be, he wasn't as tough as Darryl, obviously, but he had to have a much tougher fiber when he was handling with the players. And a lot of the players were a little bit confused. They didn't know, who is this guy? He was a guy that really liked us last year, but this year he doesn't seem to so much like us. And so that created a real problem with the team. And unfortunately, Jim was let go as head coach of the team right after just 1 year as head coach of the team. Then he was brought back in as an associate coach when Mike Keenan came in to be coach of the team. So to me, you've got to be very, very careful if you're making an internal decision with regard to a coach, especially after you've had a hard line coach like Darryl, being the guy that was there previously. So, and Jim Playfair never got another chance to be a head coach again in the NHL. And I think he would have made a real good one.
I do too. Speaking of friends of the program and guys I really like, I think he was in the unenviable position of having to work for the former coach. Let's use Ryan Huska as an example. I would like to think it would be different for Ryan Huska if he got elevated into that position, but it's a fair question to ask, right? Because he'd be in the exact same position. Former American League coach for some of these guys, then the assistant, and now the head coach. And, that one, it really didn't work.
Yeah, unfortunately, he had Jim had great success as a minor league, as you mentioned, and was very, very studious. There are some people were saying, some players are telling me that when Mike Keenan was the coach, it was Jim Playfair who was drawing up the strategies for all the games for the team. So
yes, no, I heard some of that too. But it does bring us one last one on this topic, and that's Mitch Love. And Mitch Love is in this really interesting position of being the it guy. And if the Flames had no coaching, vacancies this year, people would be talking about Mitch Love, right? That he reminds me of John Cooper and the way, because Cooper was in Syracuse when they hired Hartley, and he was kind of the it kid. And, I think there's some on the Flames organization that talked to Cooper and thought, maybe we ought to talk to this guy, but Feaster had already gone down that path. I feel like Mitch Love is kind of the it guy, not in the NHL right now.
Yeah, that's a different one. It's internal, but it's a little different than being an associate coach or a head coach with the team, as he's been dealing with, all the young players that are in the system, and tremendous amount of success both years. He was head coach, Stockton last year, and then this year when the team was here in Calgary as the Wranglers in the American Hockey League. So he's a real interesting candidate for that coaching job. And of course, Craig Conroy would have observed him very closely over his time with the American League team and the success that he's had and the way he handles players and all that sort of thing. So I'm sure he's going to get himself I would think, a pretty extensive interview for this job, as well as some of the other internal people that the Flames have. But he's a real interesting one. He's 38 years old, so he's a very young. The last time I was on the show a couple of weeks ago, I said I couldn't quite remember some of the other coaches' quick ages, and then of course it reminded me afterwards that Ryan Pike, I believe, came out with a mentioning that Greg Gilbert was around that same age when he was appointed coach of the Flames back in 2001, 2002. That's, of course, when they had the issue with Mark Savard. So that's just a whole bunch of little things there. But I think he's a worthy guy, no question. Mitch Love for this with this position. So,
around the league yesterday, we saw two of the positions that were filled. I have a lot of time for Barry Trotz, and I have a lot of time for the Nashville Predators organization, but that one felt a little odd to me, that they kind of left John Hines hanging there and then brought in Andrew Brunette.
Yeah, to me, that should have been done much earlier, to give John Hines an opportunity to look at some other coaching positions. Same with Sheldon Keith in Toronto. I mean, he's been sitting around waiting, and if he ends up losing that job, it's going to might be too late to get another job in the NHL for this coming season. But that was a little bit surprising, because in reality, Barry Trotz isn't taking over as GM of that team in Nashville until July 1, although he's in the chair now because David Poyle is retiring at the end of June here. But so the decision making going forward is up to the guy who's in the general manager chair, and Trotz is definitely that. But I thought it left. He could have at least told Hines that he was considering making a change, and maybe allowed him to interview elsewhere. But I guess he looked at it another way, and Andrew Brunette came in and be the guy. As I mentioned earlier, he was the guy that I think the Flames had on their list to want to talk to, and they may have had talked to him before he got this job with Nashville. And then yesterday, the other coach getting the job is Spencer Carberry, coaching now the Washington Capitals after being an assistant coach in Toronto for a couple of seasons. And now there's 4 coaching vacancies that are open around the league. The Flames have theirs, and of course Anaheim, Columbus, and the New York Rangers. It's interesting. We've had in the last couple of days here, we've had some signings. Those 2 coaches, and today the general manager in Toronto. And I'm just wondering if we might see a few more signings here in the next couple of days, because in the past, Gary Bettman, in his position as commissioner of the NHL, has sent out notices to all teams in the league that he'd prefer that they didn't make any moves for coaches, management, while the Stanley Cup Finals are on, because he wants to have the Stanley Cup Finals be the total focus. Now, some teams have not followed through on that recommendation or suggestion, and have made announcements during the Stanley Cup Final, but I'm sure they try to get around it. So it might be interesting if we see some coaching decisions made here in the next couple of days before the Stanley Cup Finals get going. And it's surprising to me is how long the New York Rangers have been without a coach since they fired Gerard Gallant. I mean, that's been a long tenure now, but almost a month since that happened. And I'm just wondering, Peter Laviolette's name has been mentioned prominently with the Rangers, and he's also been mentioned here for the Flames. But I'm just wondering if in the Rangers situation, they're waiting to talk to Joel Quenneville. And Joel Quenneville can't go back into coaching. He has to get approval from Commissioner Bettman. And Commissioner Bettman has already said that he won't talk to Quenneville about that until after the Stanley Cup Finals are over. Now, that puzzles me a little bit as to why you would wait then. I'm sure Gary has an hour somewhere in there that he can meet with Quenneville and talk over the situation that saw him forced to resign as coach of the Florida Panthers going back to the start of the previous season. So 2 years ago, rather. And so I'm just wondering if that's not holding up some of these coaching positions that are out there. He certainly would be a strong candidate, giving his Stanley Cup winning experience and as a coaching background. And of course, if you tie him up, when you want to connect him to the Flames, he and Lanny McDonald are great friends. I mean, they're real personal friends. Yeah. And of course, Lanny's not in Flame management, but he's certainly around the scene as a great ambassador for the Flame hockey team. So I'm sure that if they were considering him, they'd be talking to Lanny about Joel Quenneville. They actually were traded together when I was broadcasting Maple Leaf games in Toronto. They got traded to the Colorado Avalanche on the 28th of December, and what led to that trade was that Darryl Sittler was the captain of the team, and Punch and Black had just come in that season to be the new general manager of the team, replacing Jim Gregory. And Daryl and Punch didn't get along very well, but Daryl was the very first player. Daryl Sittler was the very first player in the history of the NHL to have a no trade clause in his contract, and he refused to be traded by the Maple Leafs, even though he was fed up with Imlach and all that sort of thing. So Imlach couldn't trade Lanny, or certain couldn't trade Daryl, so he traded his best friend Lanny and Joel Quenneville, who was a defenseman on that team, to the Colorado Rockies, and they went there with Don Cherry was coaching the Rockies. And I well remember that day there was a Leaf game that night at Maple Leaf Gardens, and there was a big demonstration out in front of the building of fans out there and criticizing the Maple Leafs for trading Lanny McDonald. And it certainly got an awful lot of media attention in Toronto at that particular time. And then it was interesting, last November, Rob, when you were the MC of the Lanny McDonald night that we had at the Saddle Dome, I was sitting at the same table with Daryl Sittler. And I mentioned to Daryl about that, and he said, "Oh yeah, that was quite an experience with Punch on that particular occasion." Eventually, I got fed up with him and told him to trade me, and that's when he got traded to Philadelphia. But he said those times when he was at the Maple Leafs, when Harold Ballard was the owner, and then Harold had brought in Punch and Black. He said he could write about 10 books on what was transpiring behind the scenes during all that time. So anyway, another interesting little development there with Joel Quenneville and Lanny McDonald.
Yeah, but who would believe them now, Pete? Right? That's the thing. We know they happen, but they're almost unbelievable.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. So.
To the matters at hand, at least with the remaining two teams, it seems like the Florida Panthers have put a little emphasis into just get in. Like now, just get in, right? Yeah,
people have been, teams have been saying that for a while. The coaches or management, just get into the playoffs. Anything can happen. And I wasn't the one that really bought into that. Like I was saying, okay, sure, it's great to make the playoffs, but the chances of you winning a Stanley Cup, which is what it's all about, when you just get in, are not very strong. Although there's some exceptions, like Daryl Sutter when he coached Los Angeles in 2012, when they finished the last qualifying team in the playoffs, and then ultimately went on to win the Stanley Cup. That is a real rare situation until this year, when we're seeing all of these upsets that have happened so far in the playoffs that have led to a Stanley Cup final here between Florida and Vegas. But I'm starting to believe more and more maybe it is just get in, because in the past, if you weren't one of the top 5 or 6 or 7 place teams overall in the league, you didn't win a Stanley Cup, even though you got into the playoffs and maybe won a round or so. But now it seems the underdogs are, maybe the game is a lot more closer than it had been at any other time in the history of the game. But these certainly the expectation level now, just get in and you do have a chance. You see what these teams have done so far this year to get themselves to the final. Vegas, not so much. They were the top team in their division. But, what the Florida Panthers have done, the teams they've knocked off to get there, has been really, really incredible. I mean, this team finished with less points than the Flames.
Yep.
They had 92 points. The Flames had 93. The Flames are not in the playoffs. The Panthers are in the playoffs, and not only in the playoffs, they're in the Stanley Cup final. So I'm going to put more into that being a possibility, just get in.
Well, to me, part of that equation now, Pete, is a guy who's done nothing all year can still find it. And Alex Lyons was the reason that the Florida Panthers got in. He came in and bailed out their season and put him on his back. And, this unheralded American Hockey League goalie got them there. And then he gets shelled at some point, and they give the net back to Bobrovsky, and he looks like the guy that you signed for $10 million.
Right? Yeah. Just absolutely incredible. I mean, everybody in the league had pretty much given up on Bobrovsky, figuring he can't, he's way, way, way overpaid. He's never going to be worth the value that you're paying him. And all of a sudden he refines his game, and he's got the team in the Stanley Cup finals after not even being the goalie when the playoffs got started. So it's just absolutely an incredible story. No question about that. So
and I think you need a little bit of what Matt Tkachuk brings to the lineup. And that's that, that kind of shift disturber, but just everything, all the intangibles that you talk about. He had them during the season. He just couldn't do it by himself for 82 games, but now he's just come to a different level.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when he was with the Flames, he was my favorite player. When I was a
Mhm.
Flames broadcaster, I never had a favorite player. I didn't feel that was proper to have a favorite player. But since I become a fan of the team,
Yep.
Matthew Tkachuk, when he was here, was my favorite Flame player. I mean, what he was doing out on the ice, his agitation, his hard work, and then paying off with the great attributes to get things done, getting some scoring and getting points and goals and that sort of thing. And he goes to Florida in his first season there with a whole bunch of new teammates. He has himself a career year, better than anything close to what he had here. And that has continued right on now into the playoffs. And he's been such a dominant feature with the Florida Panthers. I would say right now, if they were voting for the winner of the playoff MVP, that it would either be him or Bobrovsky. And, we'll see how the finals go to see how that all pans out. But those two guys certainly have been the big reason why the Panthers have gotten themselves to where they are. They've now had themselves 12 days off before they're going to play their first game. Now, some might say that's a little bit too much, and perhaps it is. But they were a team that I think the way they play needed a little bit of a break. Maybe not 12 days, but they did need a bit of a break to go into the finals. And I think the fact that they're starting this final series in Vegas and on the road is a bit of a help, because if they're a bit rusty in the first game, at least they won't have lost a game at home, and they can regain themselves as it goes along. But I'm looking forward to this final to being a real dandy series between two teams that have got a lot. They've got a lot going for themselves. When you look at it, I think the better goaltender is with Florida. That's if Bobrovsky continue his outstanding play. The better defense is definitely with Vegas. They've got some real depth on defense, and both teams have some real good depth up front. So I'm looking for a great series. I think Tkachuk, of course, will be a big factor with the Panthers. But another guy, a guy with the Vegas team that has almost been as impactful as Jack Eichel.
Yes.
He's really come into his own and living up to the promise he was when he was drafted by the Buffalo Sabres, where things didn't quite work out for him. Then he had that big surgery that the Sabres wouldn't recommend that he have, or wouldn't agree to let him have it. He goes out on his own, has it. Then he comes back, and it's taken him a while. But boy, he's really been playing very well in the playoffs as well. So anyway, looking forward to a great series. As far as making a prediction, Rob, I don't know if I should make one, because I've predicted every series so far in the playoffs, and there have been 14 series. I've been right on 7 of them, and I had the wrong winner in both conference finals. So should I pick a winner now?
Sure, but do like me. Half an hour from now, you can change your mind, because that's how I go.
Okay, I'm betwixt and between. We got Tkachuk for Florida, and Vegas has more Canadian-born players on their roster than Florida does. They have 14. So I'm going to stick with the country.
Are you? Okay.
Vegas wins.
Okay. Gav, our producer's taking Vegas in 6. I'm going to go with, I have no ill will towards Matt Tkachuk. I really don't. I can understand why people, he left us and all those sort of things. That's the business. I wish the Flames could have done a better job of trying to keep him. And I think the building will help and all of those sort of things. But he's hard not to like. I got to know him a little bit. I was around him a little bit. And I don't know, I've been put off by Vegas a little bit that they had such success coming in, and now you have to listen to all of these stats about, how successful they've been, how many, finals they've been to already, how many semifinals they've been and everything. They stacked the deck for that team like no other team has been stacked. Even Seattle didn't have the opportunities coming into the league that Bill Foley's team did.
Right. Yep, absolutely. I mean, Gary Bettman even made that comment going back to an interview that I heard him do not all that long ago, saying that the league decided that with the amount of money that they were charging Vegas to come in and then Seattle, that they were going to allow it to have better players for them to select from when they're taking players off opposing teams. Teams will only be able to throw 10 players each team could protect in the last 2 expansion drafts. So you were 9 players, I think it was. So you were getting the 10th best player on all of these teams, and that had helped make these teams successful so quickly. Although I was quite surprised that Vegas was able to get to the final so quickly when they did the first time, and Seattle doing it again. But they got some good quality players in there, and they had themselves a very good run this season. But that was a good mark on the part of the motive ownership to allow these teams to have a better opportunity to be successful rather than be in the bottom of the league for a long period of time that they built their team to contending fashion.
No, and it's a good. I think it was the right move. Don't get me wrong. I think it was the right move. I'm just not empathetic to, Florida. When Rhett played for Florida 3 years in, that was a story, right? John Van Beesbrook and the Rats and all of that. That was a story. Vegas.
Did you know that Rat thing started with the Flames?
Did it start with the Flames?
Yeah, the Flames were playing in Florida. Yeah. And before the game, Scott Mellenby killed a rat in the dressing room.
Right.
He then went out and scored 2 goals in that game against the Flames. And ever since that, they called that the Scott Mellenby hat trick. And that's how the rat pack or rat, whatever they call it, became famous in Florida. That was in the old building where in Miami, where they played the game in a very rough part of town. And that started a night where they beat the Flames and Scott Mellenby killed a rat in the dressing room with his hockey stick, then went out and scored a couple of goals. So they got the hat trick, won the game, and then the Rats followed on the ice as they had that great run in the playoffs that year. And now it's back again in the mode all these years later in a much, much better building. And also now they're getting sellout crowds. I mean, I remember watching some of their games this season. When you watch them on television, you look at the empty seats that were in the stands are incredible for an NHL team that had done so well, especially last year when they finished #1 overall. But, they brought hockey, finally made it something that's popular in South Florida, where prior to that, only Tampa was the one that was getting great, great hockey excitement. But now it's also spread to the other side of the coast.
No, and let's not throw stones at glass houses, Pete, because when I arrived in 2003, 2004, there were some, gloomy nights and Tuesdays in the fall and stuff like that. The crowds weren't much better here either, right? So
you're right.
Give them a winner.
Yes, Rob, I can remember nights there when we were in that run where the Flames had gone 7 straight years with no playoffs. There weren't 7,000 people in the building. The upper area there where we were, there was nobody. And, things weren't looking very good for the Slam hockey team at the time.
And the same in Edmonton, too.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, Edmonton had a downtime also. You're right. Yep. Yeah. Both of those cities had great success for a while. And then when things went a little bit flat, their attendance went way down, and both of them have been able to recover sufficiently, quite greatly, actually. The Flames really have been having close to sellout crowds ever since they had that playoff run in 2004, which to me, and I think we've talked about it here before, is that I really believe that saved the franchise.
Yes,
because if that team hadn't made the playoffs that year, it would have been 8 years in a row, no playoffs, and then there was no hockey the year after that because the players were all locked out for the 04-05 season. And then when they came back for the 05-06 campaign, the Saddledome was full of people. But that, I don't think, been the case if there had been 9 straight years of no playoff hockey here in Calgary. So
no, I agree with you.
And now we've got a new arena.
Now yes, we do. Yes, that's what I understand. So, next year, when does it open, Pete? Do we have a timetable?
I don't think they can build it that fast, but it would be nice if they could put the shovel in the ground today and start going. But they've got a bunch of things that have to get worked out behind the scenes. But we were a little bit concerned going into the election on Monday that if the NDP had emerged as the power, that this thing might have to go through a re-examination. But the fact that Daniel Smith and the UPC have now the majority, they'll start working now on getting that going. Some of the information seems to indicate that they'll start probably in after the Stampede in 2024. So that's not this summer, but the following summer. So we're still a while before we're going to see this team in the building. It's probably going to take, I would guess, 3 years to build the building, and so we're a little way down the road. But at least now we've got an opening that the building is pretty much on its way, and look forward to having that all get rounded out and the shovels go in the ground, and we can, once they get the new one in there, it'll be a much, much better scene for fans to go to watch the game, and better for the players that are involved there, and to be in more update facilities.
Agreed. You'll excuse me if I'm just a little nervous until we see shovels.
Yes, because we were at this point once before.
Yes, we have been. We have been. Before I let you go, the Flames, what do we got this date in Flames history?
Well, this time now, going back, it's May 31st. But before I do that, I'm going to talk about May 29th and May 31st. So this, of course, was in that 2004 playoff run that the Flames had, and it was on the 29th of May that the Flames won Game 3 of that series against Tampa. That game was in the Saddle Dome, and a big 3-0 victory for the Flames to gain 2-1 lead in the series. Mika Kiprasov stopped 21 shots to get the shutout, his 5th shutout of the playoffs, and that would be his last playoff shutout of that run. Chris Simon and Jerome McGinley both had a goal and an assist in that game, but that was also the night that Jerome McGinley and Vincent Lecavalier engaged in that fight that gained an awful lot of attention around the NHL when those two top players had that fight. Now, then we go to May 31st, which is 2004 on this night. And that is another game that was played in the Saddle Dome, and Tampa won that game 1-0 to tie the series at 2-2. Brad Richards scoring the only goal. That was a power play goal that came early in the game, 2 minutes and 48 seconds into the first period. Brad Richards scored that goal, and the Flames couldn't get one by Nikolai Habibulin, who stopped 29 shots for that shutout, and then Mika Kiprasov stopped 27 shots in the Flame net, allowing just the one goal. And of course, series then would go to Tampa for Game 3, and the Flames would win that one 3-2 in overtime and take a 3-2 lead in the series. That was also the 10th road game the Flames won on that playoff run, which tied an NHL record that still stands. They're tied with the New Jersey Devils, who did that prior to that. And then, of course, we had the infamous game here at the Saddle Dome on June the 5th when the Panthers won in double overtime, the Lightning scored in double overtime to steal that game from the Flames, I guess the best way to put it, because Marty Jelena actually scored a goal for the Flames with about 8 minutes left to go in the third period, but they didn't have the video review that we have now, so it was determined that the puck had not gone across the line, although since then we've seen pictures of the puck across the goal line. So anyway, Tampa won that game, and then it would send the series to Game 7, and that one was a 2-1 victory for the Lightning, and they captured the Stanley Cup in Tampa on June the 7th. Flames got behind in that game 2-0, and then the current general manager of the Flames, Craig Conroy, scored a power play goal at 9:21 of the third period, getting the Flames back to within one, and they made it a battle. They had a brief power play in the closing couple of minutes there, but they couldn't get the tying goal, and Tampa won the Stanley Cup. So that was all the case in 2004.
I want to rewind just a little bit to that 1-0 loss to Tampa. Pete, that was the Kerry Fraser call?
That's right. Yes, that's right.
Was that a 5-on-3 goal?
I think it was a 5-on-4.
Okay.
I'd have to go back and check that. I should have checked that.
Remember, everybody lost their mind about Kerry Fraser.
Yes, right? And that's why Kerry Fraser. Wait, now let me get this right.
Was he not?
He was supposed to be the referee of Game 6.
Yeah,
that's right. He was supposed to be the referee in Game 6, and the league said no, it's better not because of the incidents that happened in Game 4. You're right. That may have been a 5-on-3. I should have checked that closer. I'm sorry.
Oh yes, please apologize for not having the information on something 20 years ago that I could completely be wrong on.
I'll check. I'll send you a text after this is done.
All right, send me a text. And before I let you go, what do you think? Brad and Craig hook up, big deal. You know, maybe Calgary can fleece Toronto. Maybe, you know, fair is fair. Go back and revisit history a bit.
Yes, we are deserving of having a fair, being the winner of a trade between those two teams. Going back to 92 when Cliff Fletcher, who had been the Flames general manager, left here to be the general manager in Toronto, just as Brad Treliving has done now, except Brad didn't get a Stanley Cup here, which Cliff did in 1989. And of course, that big 10-player trade, one of the biggest trades in NHL history, was made, and it ended up with the Flames not getting very much positive in that exchange. They, of course, gave up Doug Gilmour and Jamie McCowan and Rick Walmsley and Rick Natras in that trade, and ended up getting the best player they got back in that trade was Gary Lehman. And he didn't turn out too well as a member of the Flames, although later he would go on to win a Stanley Cup with the Montreal Canadiens. So,
Sure.
yeah, that was you know, a lot of people say that Cliff Fletcher picked the Flames' pockets on that particular trade, but it was a situation where Doug Gilmour was going to be traded. He had had a run-in with the Flames' then general manager, Doug Risebrough, over a contract thing. And the thing with Doug, when Doug Risebrough was the GM of the Flames, he was like he played. Everything was a confrontation. And he and Gilmour got themselves into a big confrontation with regard to his contract. And then it got to a point where they said he's going to be traded. He's got to be traded. So he got traded. And what was really interesting is that Cliff Fletcher, when he was general manager of the Flames, wanted to get Gary Leeman for the Flames. Couldn't get a trade pulled off. He goes to Toronto, and he's there a limited amount of time, and he wants to trade Gary Leeman. So that should have told the people in the Flames office, so some of those were in his office when Cliff was here, that maybe there was an issue with Gary Leeman. And it turned out he wasn't the good player that they were thinking they were getting in that transaction. And some of the other players they got there have escaped my mind. And some of them never got to play in the NHL.
As they should. As they should. Great to catch up, Pete. Lots of good stuff there. Obviously, we wait to hear from Brad Treliving tomorrow. He'll speak to the media about his new job in Toronto, and eagerly awaiting some of Craig's first decisions so that people can judge what kind of GM he's going to be. Right? That's what
There's going to be lots to talk about. There's no question about that.
Yep.
No doubt. The summer is not going to be quiet from a hockey standpoint.
Never is around here. Good to see you, my friend. Thanks for doing this.
All right. You take care, Rob. Chat later.
Peter Maher, everybody, the legend, the Hall of Fame, 7 Hall of Fames, I believe. Brought to you by Ski Cellar Snowboard, skicellarsnowboard.com. 76 years in Calgary. Live in the Oodle Noodle studio. We're not just crazy about noodles. We put the same energy back into the community. 2 locations, 1244 17th Avenue Southwest. Pickup and delivery at 105 Main Street North in Airdrie as well. Well, we're not going to let the moss grow under our feet. Speaking of Hall of Famers, we are blessed to have another one in, brought to you by Ski Cellar Snowboard. Just 4 locations normally, just 1 location open right now. That's McLeod Trail by Chinook Center. Make sure you check them out for some great off-season deals, and online, skicellarsnowboard.com. She will be enshrined in the Canadian Football League Hall of Fame in the media division later on this summer, and kind enough to join us, I guess, because school's out for summer, as Alice Cooper once sang. Vicki Hall is with us. Hello, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm awesome. Glad you could make some time for us. What is keeping you busy these days?
Well, I'm teaching at SAIT.
Yep.
I teach journalism at SAIT, and the students go to school in the summer, a lot of them. So,
do they?
So it's just teaching.
So you don't get like a 5-month break?
No. So they were doing election work this week, and so it's been a busy week.
How is that for them?
Well, we do have a lot of international students. So some of the rivalry that was playing out, just like a sports rivalry, was a bit shocking to them.
Okay.
I also had some students from India. You know how the reporters were all upset because the election results were slow coming in and how terrible this is. They were laughing the next morning. They were like, it takes a month in India. They like basically they gather them all together and put them in one building and count them.
Right. We're a little spoiled, right?
It was kind of funny to hear their perspective.
Just a little spoiled. We just had Peter Maher on, get you to react. I don't know how you covered a little bit of Brad Treliving, didn't you?
Yeah, very beginning. Yeah.
Very
And
beginning.
then I actually, through the pandemic, I was covering the Stanley Cup playoffs all the way through for CBC.
Okay.
So not as a beat writer, but as an NHL writer.
Okay. Surprised to see that he lands in Toronto as the general manager?
Not one bit.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, it seems like a natural fit. Brad is great with the media. He's got experience. He's not scared to make bold moves. To me, he's exactly what the Leafs need, especially after what transpired. So I think he'll do great there. I mean, but that being said, I don't know of anyone short of winning the Stanley Cup. That's basically the bar that you are at. So I mean, he'll be criticized like crazy, but I don't think that's going to bother him.
No, Pete and I were talking about that, and I hope people understand it's not an endorsement so much of Toronto in this situation, but I fully get why you want to go there, because you want to be the person that brings the Stanley Cup. to Toronto. You'll never pay for lunch again. You'll never pay for a drink again, right? They'd build a statue to you. Nick Nurse is never going to have to pay anything in Toronto. He won the Raptors their NBA championship. Sure, he can be in Philly, but it still will be our Nick Nurse, right?
Yeah, and if you talk to the players, like the ones who are from like the big horseshoe down there, and the population is so high. I mean, I talked to Mark Giordano, like, I don't know, 8 years before he went to the Leafs. And every time we'd go to Toronto, it would be like, what do you think about maybe playing here one day?
Yeah.
And they would all get a sparkle in their eye, and they would they'd be lying to you if they said they would never be interested. Or do you remember how excited a lot of those players would get in Toronto? Like you'd go to the Air Canada Center, and it was one thing I didn't fully realize until I started covering the team is like, it's a job for them. And some nights they've played 5 games in 8 nights, and they're tired, and you're back to back, and you're playing in Columbus. And I think, I was remembering when I was little and listening to Peter Maher.
Yeah.
And I mean, to me, everything was like live or die with what it was. But some nights they're at work, and that's what they're doing. And we all have good days at the office and bad days at the office. I'm sure you do too. And so some days I teach well, and some days I'm sure the students would tell you I don't. Yeah. But when you get to Toronto, especially for Hockey Night in Canada on Saturday, they were all little boys again.
Yep. No, it's a great point, and I don't think you get it. It didn't dawn on me right away. You just assume, well, you're playing a game and you're getting paid millions of dollars, so you should be the happiest human being in the entire universe. It's not how it works. They don't know any different, right? They don't. It's not like these kids came up working in a grocery store and then got all. This has been. They come up, they get the little contract, and they get the big It's work. But there's something about the lights in Toronto. There's something about playing there. There's something about they can complain about the media all they want, but it's the story. Like it's 50, 60 deep in that dressing room every day. Right. Yeah.
And even on the counter side, it was interesting because I was used to covering a Canadian team.
Sure.
So we would go down to San Jose or Anaheim or whatever. And it would be interesting because quite often it would be the Canadian players who were hanging around in the dressing room part where the media could go.
Yeah.
And they might be like, oh, I hate the media. No, they were like,
they like the attention.
They like the attention. Like it was, and so Toronto is the epicenter of that. But I think I talked to so many players who that's where they want to be. And so for Brad, I think it's a great place for him. I think if anyone can manage the media pressure, it's him. And I also think it's fresh eyes to make some decisions on that team where they go forward, because they have some big decisions to make. And I also think that the Johnny Gaudreau situation, Brad's not going to let that happen again. So it'll be interesting.
That whole, let's table that for a second, because that one's got a little bit of a unique life here. The other part is Sheldon Keefe, right? Like, what do you do with the coach? And I said to Pete, not unlike when he took over this team and Bob Hartley. I wonder how much the Bob Hartley experience is going to kind of influence Brad Treliving and his decision on the coach there.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he makes the team his own faster. I don't know what he's going to do for sure, but I think it will be bold. No, it's not going to be risk adverse. That's for sure. He's not going to be risk adverse.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Does he? So if the locals go with Huska, does he try and pull Love in, or if they go with Love, does he pull Husk in?
He could very well. Very well. I would say, especially if it's Love, who's
he has there. That John Cooper, I don't know, new car smell that Cooper had in Syracuse, right? People were talking about John Cooper long before he got to the NHL. And I think Mitch Love's starting to get a little of that.
Okay, so I was listening to some commentator talk, I think yesterday, and they were saying that Craig Conroy needs to hire someone with NHL experience because he's the new GM. I'm not saying I agree with that. I don't necessarily, but
that because Conroy's a new GM, he needs a coach with NHL experience.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it was Nick Kiprios who was saying that.
Well, then there you go.
but it's an interesting argument, right? I think Brad would be totally comfortable taking someone like Mitch. And I do agree with you. I think that maybe that's exactly what the Leafs need.
Yes, but I would counter the point that Nick's making that let's throw out all the old conventions, because based on that, then the Flames need to find a players coach now, because they just got rid of a hard ass, so you got to bring a players coach in, and then when he goes, we'll bring in a hard ass. Like, there's so many of these old conventions, right? Well, he's a new GM, so he's got to have a freaking old veteran coach. Like Gerard Gallant's name really surprised me, and I felt bad. I forgot that he was an East Coaster. So when you bring that point up to Pete, you're kind of like, you're taking a run at the East Coast. I didn't mean that, but I'm surprised Gerard Gallant's name has come up.
Well,
because he just lost the team, didn't he? Isn't that the complaint in New York? He lost the team.
That was the allegation was that for sure. It
Right.
was similar to the story here. So
Right.
I don't know. I mean, like that to me seems like the way the world goes. I mean, in newspapers back when there was a healthy broadsheet and a tab in town, at the Edmonton Journal would be like, we don't want to have crime on the front page. We're not going to have crime on the front page.
Right.
We want to be an intelligent, we're the paper of record. Then some major crime would happen that the Sun would get and the Edmonton Journal wouldn't get. And all of a sudden it would be like, we need crime on the front page every day. So I do think that, and I also think that Craig is, we kind of just jumped right into this, but he's smart enough to not necessarily go with the conventions and go with hockey culture and make an intelligent decision that he's comfortable with himself.
I wholeheartedly endorse that. I mean, I'm biased. I am. I know I'm biased, but the thing that's bugged me a little bit and is this. The way that he's been portrayed is it's happy-go-lucky Craig. Dog's got some bite. He can make a decision. He's going to have to make some decisions here, right? And you brought it up with Brad, but Craig mentioned it in his press conference. They can't have another Johnny Gaudreau. Everybody seems okay with it. In the past, wouldn't that be a criticism? Ooh, Craig just criticized the previous general manager. But I don't read it as that because I think Brad would say the same thing to you. That was a learning experience for everybody involved.
But I remember Craig like that as a player. Like if you wanted an honest assessment of the game, like what happened in the game tonight? What did we do? And he wouldn't throw his teammates under the bus, but he also would tell you the truth.
Yes.
It was almost like he respected you too much to
lie to you.
To lie or to treat you like you didn't know. Like, and so I think, but that's really an interesting talk about leadership, period. Either you have to be the hard ass or you're the nice players coach. And people struggle with the middle. And I think that the middle is actually where society's going.
Do we, or is the narrative struggling with the middle?
Well, I think the narrative is traditionally that it needs, and especially in sports culture, and maybe masculine sports culture.
Yes.
Like
I think that's fair.
I don't want to be unfair there with that, but it's just like, we need somebody who's no nonsense and we want to do this or we need to react to that. And we need to get someone who's really nice, even as an instructor at school or anyone who's listening, who's a manager, that kind of thing. Like the workforce today, especially young people, they will not put up with what you and I probably put up with when we were younger. Like I worked at a fast food restaurant where the manager told me I had excrement for brain because I messed up an order. That's not going to happen now. That's not going to happen now. But at the same time, they also don't want somebody who they can just run right over. Like they want structure and they want someone who's going to give them honest feedback. And they want so I don't think it's one or the other.
But don't you think that that's part of our struggle right now is that we society hasn't kept up with that. We now defer to managers rather than leaders. Leaders tell you things you don't want to hear.
Absolutely.
And we don't like that. Right. And I think, not to make a case for Daryl Sutter, because I'm not sure it's exactly black and white like that, but Daryl was never going to tell you what you wanted to hear. Daryl was going to tell you what you needed to hear. And I think there's a bit of a struggle there. Right. I think we're happier with managers and tell us it'll be all right tomorrow rather than no, you effed up and now go fix it. Right.
Well, I mean, Kevin in superhero hockey.
Yeah. Talking about
a leader.
Right.
Talking about a leader. So my son plays superhero hockey.
It's the first anybody's heard of it on this program.
Yeah, Kevin will tell him nicely. But, AJ, you need to not get that mad at your teammate because they didn't pass to you.
Yep.
He'll tell you the truth.
Right.
He's one of the kindest men I know, but
you need to hear it.
Yep.
You need to hear it. And I hope that that's what Craig brings to this. So, again, that whole idea of they can't have another Gaudreau happen puts him in an interesting precarious position now because he's kind of indicated that, he's going to make a determination right away on the 7 guys for next year. Right.
I wonder if that's throughout the whole league. Like, I wonder if Gaudreau is the last Gaudreau. Like, if they're not, like, basically, and Matthew Tkachuk maybe changed it all by saying, hey, I'm not going to sign with you long term. I'm wondering if the timeline just moves up.
Once again, the Flames have become the kind of the harbinger of things to come, right?
Because actually it was 2 of their own players. because now Matthew, like even Tavares, it was the same thing in New York, right?
Yes.
Like
Yes, it was.
thought they had him, and they thought they had him, and boom, he was
Yep.
last second he was gone, and he goes to the island now, and someone who should be a legend, who should be applauded, it's not like that. Like
But didn't Stamkos kind of ruin that for everybody because he poked his head out into free agency and then he came home again?
He did, but it's a risk reward. If you're a general manager
Yes.
now,
Oh.
and even as a player now, would have the Matthew Tkachuk situation even been at the front of your mind before? Like the deadline was the deadline. Now I'm wondering if the deadline's just been moved up. It's like the deadline's like 6 months, whatever.
I think it's a great point, Vicki. I really do. And you know what I equate it to? I equate it to the second contract of Rick Nash, because that changed the financial game, and that led to the second lockout in 2012. And that was, Doug McLean paying a star for being a star, not giving him a bridge deal. And people were pointing back to that. I think in the same way, people are going to point back in the next decade. We had to change business because of what happened to Calgary.
Yeah. And so Elias Lindholm, do you want to stay or do you want to go? Austin Matthews, do you want to stay or do you want to go? Like, I think it's the risk of having a player who's an asset because of, think about the money that's involved, and sit there and just walk out the door.
Right.
Like, businesses don't let Johnny Gaudreau's walk out the door because you felt that you were negotiating in good faith and that it was going to work out okay.
It's now you're presenting this in a really interesting format for me, because Gaudreau, to me, Gaudreau was more of a mirror, a look back at yourself. Left $15 million and a year on the table. Could not get that anywhere else. Said he didn't want it. And then Tkachuk said, hey, I'm going to help you out. I'm not going to resign, so here's where I'll go. They're almost two different stories. The bigger one to me is the Tkachuk one, because I think, has the capability of going down as the best player this organization ever drafted. Not necessarily the best player that it had, we'll see. But definitely the best player this organization. He has the potential of that.
I fully 100% agree.
Right. And until Craig Button reminded me, I'm like, well, what happened this year versus he was injured last year. I wasn't in the business, so I wasn't thinking straight, but he had the hand injury, right?
Yep.
Against Edmonton. So you can't really go, well, we blew up in Florida. He was hurt. Right. And we now see what a healthy Matthew Tkachuk is at 25, 26 years old.
Yeah. I've been reflecting on the Matthew stuff because I covered him like when he was very young. I was in there, and like, to me, it was interesting when I was writing for CBC. I wrote quite a few stories on him, and it was interesting even then. Like, if you were writing nationally, if you wrote about the Flames, so people might not like this. If you write about the Flames or the Oilers, I was writing about both.
Yep.
The Oilers stories would always get way more hits.
Sure.
And some of it was Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, and some of it was just the Oilers.
Yep.
Like, some of it was just, but if you wrote about Matthew Tkachuk, they got comparable numbers. The rest of the Flames, no. So I think he was always had that celebrity, like that thing to him.
Yeah.
But I would write about him, and I sometimes, if you go back, I bet you there were places where I called him the future captain.
Yeah.
And did not put a conditional, like, as a reporter, you always have to put your, like, likely future captain.
Yeah, or
some
exactly.
kind of
Hedge your bet a little bit.
Alleged. Yeah. You hedge your bets. And I don't think I did with Matthew. I was so sure he was just like, to me, it was just like, he's the future captain of the Flames.
I was and still am. And I don't profess to know the inner workings of that situation, but I look at all of the failings, if you will, of the Calgary Flames, or all the things that have hurt this team. That's the one that I would do the deepest dive on. Why? And it's so easy to say, well, he's American. He'll go, well, his brother's in Ottawa. His brother's the captain in Ottawa. Craig Conroy's the general manager of this team. Last time I checked his passport, he was American. So I don't buy that, but I do buy that maybe this organization do enough to keep him? Should they have given him the captaincy? Was that important to him? I thought it was.
I think it was very important to him, and he wanted the long-term contract. And, I mean, I've thought a lot about it too. I mean, it's a workplace.
Yeah.
And if I can say that some of the workplaces I've been in, when I was a senior reporter, if there was a 22-year-old or something who came in and they wanted all the big stories, and they were, maybe didn't show quite the respect I thought, I might not have been thrilled. It might have rubbed me the wrong way.
Absolutely.
And Matthew walked in at 18, very confident in who he was and what he could bring.
Yep.
And the other thing is, Matthew grew up around NHL dressing rooms, so that romanticism and stuff like that to him, like, I mean, he was grateful, but that was just work.
Yeah. No. He didn't see it any different, right?
Yeah. And so to me, but yeah, it's easy for me to say in hindsight, and any of us to say in hindsight, and then especially with him doing what he's done. But I think he showed signs of it all along. And during the lockout, not the lockout season, the pandemic season,
Yeah.
where they were playing the Canadian teams,
Yeah.
and like the whole thing with the flipping the puck and all that
Yeah.
stuff. Matthew was like making that must-see TV every night.
Yeah.
Like and I can see how the players might be like, oh, but he, you know, he's a star. He's an entertainer.
He is an entertainer. That's a great way of putting it. I think he's obviously a great hockey player, but the chewing of the mouth guard. I remember year one, he tried the between the legs stuff, and and part of me's going, thank God. And the other part's going, well, they're going to beat that out of him, because this league doesn't allow it. Thank God they did. And he scored for that overtime goal against Nashville, maybe the greatest goal in the regular season that the Flames ever scored. Right.
Yep.
And that was the fruition of him trying and nobody taking that away from him. And in the past, we've seen that taken away from him. And now I watch him and, he willed that team back against Boston. That's a good team. And he willed them back. He just got right inside of their heads, which is shocking because that's a team with Marchand, right? It shouldn't happen to that team.
Maybe an older Marchand. Maybe that's part of it.
Yeah, maybe that's part of it. But
Yeah,
he willed them out of that.
He did. And it was his moment. It was like he knew it was his moment.
Yeah.
That he was channeling Mark Messier there.
Yeah.
Like he's a very smart, I almost called him a kid, but he's not he's a smart man. And I mean, for people who cheer for the Flames, I think it must be really hard. But for the league itself, it's a win. For him being in Florida.
The only part that bothers me, Vicki, is that here we are a year later with him being in the MVP conversation and the Flames and the Oilers rivalry the last couple of years, they've got Draisaitl and they've got McDavid, right? Now you have to, not that he's McDavid, not that he's Draisaitl, but he's not that far behind either, right? In terms of how he can impact a game.
He might bring, in some ways, respectfully, like, is he like Connor? No one's like Connor McDavid.
No,
and actually, no one's like Draisaitl either.
No,
close.
No.
But in terms of affecting a game and getting in the opponent's heads and doing like getting those dirty goals.
Yeah.
And the pretty goals too. Like he can do both.
He can do. I mean, the series winner against Carolina was as nice a goal as you're going to see.
But he'll also just be standing at the front of the net.
Is he going to have an impact post Flames career? Is he going to have an impact on how we view Johnny Gaudreau? Because Johnny Gaudreau is a really skilled hockey player, maybe one of the most skilled hockey players I've ever seen. But I'm not sitting here lamenting Johnny Gaudreau the same way. It's not like if they had Johnny Gaudreau this year, they probably were a playoff team because he would have gotten you those goals that you needed.
Yeah, he would have.
But you look at Tkachuk and go, man, you wish you had that. I just wonder if post-career or post-time in Calgary, if Matthew Tkachuk's not going to make people forget more about Johnny Gaudreau.
I mean, he's a franchise player. I mean, we're talking about Hart Trophy, right? Like he's like Conn Smythe, maybe. Like
is Gaudreau?
No, sorry, Tkachuk is.
No, I know, but is Gaudreau?
No, I don't think of it that way, and maybe I should. Right?
I did when he was here.
Yeah, like he's obviously like the numbers he put up are incredible, but like it's game 7 of a Stanley Cup playoff series.
Yeah.
Which player is going to have the most impact in that game?
Yeah. Yeah. And
I would personally, if you and I were drafting them, I would take Tkachuk.
Yeah.
I would take Tkachuk.
And I defended Johnny because I heard that a lot. And some of the places that I heard that would surprise people from hockey people that, you can't win with him. You can't win with him. And I would defend that because there were times where it was Johnny Gaudreau, Sean Monahan, and not much else. Right. Yuri Oodle was nuts. Like, what was that? Like, I don't know. Right. They kind of succeeded beside him or despite him at times. And, that series where they beat Vancouver and then they went up against the Anaheim Ducks. Whew. But Johnny Gaudreau scored, an incredible goal there on a power play. He did some stuff as best he could, but holy cow, now what we're seeing, no, it's Matthew Tkachuk.
No, like Johnny, like it's not to take away from his value, but like, can you win with Johnny Gaudreau? Yes. Will you win game 7 totally because of Johnny Gaudreau? I would take Tkachuk.
Well, he did win you game 7, right? He did against Dallas.
Yes, but I still would take Tkachuk.
Yeah.
Today, I can choose one player.
Yeah.
Game 7.
And hey, listen, he ended up where he ended up. He ended up in a non-playoff team that,
he's still he's an incredible player.
Oh, sure
and he's
he
a
is.
Flames legend.
He will be, but I just wonder if post Flames, if Tkachuk isn't going to kind of.
So, because what's he going to do next?
Well,
and if I was in Edmonton for a while when I was younger.
Yeah,
too.
yeah,
When you
yeah.
look back, Tkachuk brings more the Messier stuff.
Yeah, that's true.
He
That's
does.
true.
And Johnny Gaudreau's not Gretzky, but
Yeah.
if you're saying type of player.
Yeah. Well, he's more rounded,
Yeah.
right? He's more rounded. So moving forward, they don't have those guys. I think they've got to make, and he's already said he wants, his priority is Lindholm. And I had this conversation with Boomer. Boomer said, you got to move on. But man, unless you have Lindholm, what do you got up the middle? Kadri.
Yeah, Lindholm's a great player.
Yeah. But he's in that sneaky age, right? Like, what are you paying him for?
Yep. And then, does he want to stay?
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
Like that was an incredible line.
Yep.
Lindholm, Gaudreau, Tkachuk.
Yep.
The other two are gone. What does he want to do?
Yep.
I think that's the thing. And the great thing about Craig is I think that those conversations, I never felt that Craig was trying to BS anyone.
No.
But when people are genuine and honest and show me who they are, I probably will too.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that might mean that maybe some of the game playing and the hiding one's hand might happen less with Craig.
Yeah.
And that's not a knock on Brad. That's just
it's just an MO.
Craig.
That's the way he does business, right?
That's Craig. Every conversation that's why in his media conferences and everything, he's going to answer the question.
Yeah. 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 But I go back to my point. Don't sleep on him. Don't think he's an easy mark.
No, not at all.
He's got, like you said, he was always a guy that would give an honest, he wouldn't come and put lipstick on the pig.
No.
Right?
And the thing is, he's been around. How long has it been? 10 years that he's been apprenticing?
I think longer than that.
Yeah. So he's been there. I've seen him after Flames losses and he's wearing his suit and he's they're all looking so sour and they're marching on to the elevator. And Craig, who has a hard time not smiling at any time when he sees you because he's trying to be polite.
Yeah.
He's been around all of it. And he knows every single person at the Saddle Dome.
Mm-hmm.
Not just on the Flames. He knows all their security people. He knows their concession. He knows everyone. And so I think Craig probably knows what he wants to do. If it's going to be internal, because he knows people and he'll choose the people that he thinks are best. And that's an educated opinion. He's in there.
Yep.
He knows.
Yeah.
And I thought from his news conference when he was announced, you could tell that he was having his thoughts all the way through what's unfolded with the Flames for the last year or so. But
he's always been a GM in waiting. And I don't know if I like Brad Pascal, and had they announced Brad Pascal as the GM, I would have endorsed him and I would have sat here and thought good things were going to happen. And maybe it's just because I know Craig, but Craig's been a GM in waiting in a long time. He's always been a company guy. It's not about, but I bet you in those meetings, when you got behind closed doors, he was not shy about sharing his opinion, and he was not shy about how a team should be built. And, he wasn't shy talking about the chemistry in the locker room this year. Right.
Yeah. I mean, I remember when we were covering the Flames and it was Brent Sutter, Daryl Sutter, and it was a tough place to be. It was a pretty negative work environment for a while there. And you'd go into the dressing room and almost no one would say anything.
Yep.
But Craig Conroy would talk.
Yep.
Mike Camilleri would talk.
Yes. Cammy would too.
Yeah.
Cammy would too.
Yeah, both of them would.
There's a guy whose name we haven't talked about as a coach. What about Alex Tanguay?
I think Alex Tanguay, I don't know in terms of head coach, I would probably say Mitch Love, but I don't. But Alex Tanguay, I just keep thinking back to when it was Tanguay, Iginla, Camilleri. It was a lot. And you talk to Alex was another one who was always available. Not always, but most days Alex was there. And Alex is a great talker and very thoughtful. Different than Craig in that he wasn't smiling all the time.
No,
he
wasn't.
He had a bit of a different presence to him. But it was always the strategy. like Jerome and I need to talk about this, and like this didn't quite work on the power play, and we need to go back, and we like he was already coaching when he was playing.
Yeah.
He was very, and he and Jerome, he trusted Jerome. Jerome trusted him. And I was wondering one day if Craig, Jerome, and Alex may have had a text conversation going on, because like they were close.
Yeah,
they were close, but they were talking strategy, and they were into that. Some guys they'd play.
Yeah,
that wasn't them. Like they were in it. And Craig was sometimes talking as a general manager when he was playing.
Oh,
we
sure.
would talk about like what's happening with this issue, or concussions in hockey, or this or that. Anything you could ask Craig, and he would answer it.
Yeah. Oh, he gave some of the best answers on Dion Phaneuf that anybody did.
Like, completely. He analyzed.
He understood that kid better than most.
Yeah, and he would laugh. I remember he would be like, yeah, like people are hard on Dion, but like he's got to do this, and he's there, and if he does this, then he's successful. Like he was talking like his coach in some ways then.
Yeah.
He would be, I can just see him standing in front of his locker there, and he was in there, and like he also was in there to help Jerome. That's another thing. Like being Jerome McGinley was sometimes hard. Like Jerome had to answer to everything and that kind of thing. And Craig was a great teammate. So was Alex, because they would go in and they would, they'd get beat 8-2, and those two would also be there to like the captain would come out with Peter Hanlon because he came out. Yeah. But the other two would be there too.
But Craig was the captain, right? And then
yes.
Right. Yes. And I think that was
I'm getting my times mixed up.
No, you're not wrong, because he gave it up in 2004. Right.
Yeah.
And he wanted to put it on Jerome. It was the time. But then it's not like he shrunk away. We were talking about managers and leaders before. It's not like he shrunk away.
No, he was in there like completely. Like he was the heartbeat in some ways. And he was the one who made sure that the guys, everyone was included. Yeah. I was thinking Doris, was it Doris, the security person? And the way that she would light up when Craig would walk in, this was the person who was like watching the Flames bench, and and most players would just walk by and not say a word. Some, I'm not saying that somewhere, but Craig knew her. Yeah. Like Craig knew the people he worked with.
Yeah. No, and to your point earlier, he knew all the names, he knew all the people. And funny though, you bring up Camilleri. That one's sticking in my craw a little bit. Why isn't he in this conversation?
You know what? I was thinking on the drive over here. I was thinking the same thing. I don't know where Mike is. I don't know, but
I believe he owns BioSteel or something, right?
Well, he was already. His head was already. He was a businessman when he was.
But of the three, when you put that line together and you bring that line back up to me, he's the one that I thought would have been a coach, right? Jerome, I always thought was going to leave the sport because he was Jerome. He didn't need to. Alex, GM maybe. I always thought Mike was going to be a coach.
See, I would have thought that Alex was going to be a coach, and he was going to be a power play coach, exactly what he was doing at the World Championships. Sure. And he was going to X's and O's and move people around. And like he was into the science of it a little bit. Yeah. Mike, though, he was into that stuff as well, but he was also like such a people person. So I can see Mike Camilleri being a head coach. I really can. If he's not. Yeah. I was going to say, if he's not a millionaire, of course he's a millionaire.
No, he's probably on an island somewhere. That's an interesting cadre of players, though, when you think about it, right? Like for that team and that organization, and you throw Kiprusoff in there and you throw Regier in there, and man, you're really thinking you wasted some years there.
Yeah, and in personalities, like if we just not just put Adrian Aucoin.
Oh yeah,
who would sit there and read like. Yep. Classic works of fiction. And when you'd go over, he didn't want to talk about hockey. He wanted to talk about what was going on in the world.
Yep. No, absolutely. Yeah, the king of the wooden stick, right?
Yeah. He sticks out in my mind for some reason.
Yeah, man, they had.
Yeah, they did. They had just some, when you look back at the quality of players.
You can't do this, but that core now, how would you build around it? How could you build around it because of the salary cap world and the way we're in it now? Maybe the biggest issue there was the lack of good drafting, right? Yeah. There was just no support, no young guys coming. All due respect to Adam Party, and Backlund was too late to that party, so to speak. There's a bad pun, but there were no young guys. There were no Pelches and,
Well, Backlund was so young, but he was almost expected to.
That was
like,
it was almost
because
it's a minor miracle they didn't ruin that kid.
Well, I was thinking about that today too, about because I was thinking about how he.
Why do you keep asking me what we're going to talk about? I keep telling you I don't know yet. And then
he could have ended up a Sven Barchi, Michael Backlund.
Yeah,
they were all over him.
That's a good example.
They were all over him.
Yep.
And he was too soft, and he, if he made a mistake, it was his fault. But he.
There's a whole bunch of people who had him traded out of here.
Yeah, and look what he's done for that franchise. And watching him this past year, my goodness. I mean, you know how they talk about playing the game right?
Yeah.
He plays the game right.
Yeah. He should have been the captain.
Yes, for sure.
That's another one. And I'm not taking a run at Daryl. I think Daryl's going to be in the Hall of Fame.
Of course he is. Yes,
that
absolutely.
sort of thing. But that was ridiculous not having a captain. And the logic behind it just doesn't hold water anymore.
To me, watching it from the outside seemed like if you looked at the decisions on their own, they didn't make sense. It felt almost like an inner office drama was playing out on the ice in front of a sellout crowd at the Saddle Dome, and the decisions weren't being made. People probably worked in workplaces where this side doesn't like this side,
sure.
and there's this faction and this faction. A lot of the decisions seem to be based on some inner thing that maybe we heard a little bit about, or maybe we guessed about, but we didn't really know what was going on because the decisions didn't seem to be made on the merit of the decisions.
Right.
Michael Backlund should have been the captain.
Yeah. Yeah. Is the last decision real consequential decision that Daryl Sutter will make as an NHL coach, putting Nick Ritchie in the shootout?
Yeah. But why did he do that?
I'm feeding into your narrative. I think it was a big, bold middle finger to certain people, and I don't know who.
Yeah, and see, I don't. But he had that on its own.
Yes.
If you ask Nick Ritchie or if you asked anyone else, does this make sense?
Yeah.
No.
Right.
But people don't do things for no reason.
No, but there is a stat that backed it up. His lone shootout goal came against the Nashville Predators and came against that goalie. So we're playing the odds, right? We know he's had success. So to me, it's again muddled. It's not crystal clear. It's crystal clear in my mind. It's a big middle finger to somebody somewhere, right?
This is the guy you gave me?
Yeah. Or, this is my guy and I'm going to show you. Go win it for me, Nick. And he doesn't.
Yeah. Either way,
right?
Way, yeah. I don't know. I mean, I guess if he scored, we'd all be talking about how he knew something that no one else did.
Right. Because if I was the coach, I'm playing Matt Phillips, and then Matt Phillips goes out and misses, and everybody's going to go, why'd you play the rookie? Right. Yeah. Why'd you play the rookie?
Well, shootouts are kind of made to make coaches look.
Yes.
Like that.
Absolutely. They are. Absolutely. They are. So do you have a betting favorite for coach?
I think it's Mitch Love, but that's it could be, it could be Ryan Huska, it could be Kirk Muller, it could be Alex Tongue, it could be Gerard Gallant. I'm not sure, but to me, if they don't hire Mitch Love, someone else is going.
Yes.
To.
Absolutely.
I think he's a head coach in the NHL season coming.
But I think Ryan Huska's that too.
Yeah, that could. Yeah,
and that's why I'm sticking with Huska. But if he doesn't get the gig, see, and Peter brought it up, is this too much like Jim Playfair, right? Playfair takes over for Daryl, and then he's replaced by Keenan the next year. And Pete's point was, when Daryl broke you down, Jimmy built you back up, and then Jimmy has to be the bad guy.
And that didn't go over.
Didn't go over well. I think there was more to it than that. I think Daryl had a lot of pressure on Jimmy to act and be a certain way and not be himself. But I absolutely agree. And the guy's name doesn't come up in all of this is Cale McLean.
Yeah. But I think the thing is that you and I can talk about it. And I know that you've had a closer view in the last few years than I have.
Yeah.
But who's had a closer view than Craig Conroy?
He's been
one.
in Stockton. He was in Adirondack. He was in Abbotsford. He's seen all of the different incarnations. He was in Kelowna watching Huska as a junior coach before. He was in Saskatoon watching Mitch Love as a junior coach, right?
He's probably had dinner with all of them.
Oh.
Like he knows their families.
Wow,
Like
he did the grouse grind with Gulletson when they hired him, right? They ran up the mountain together.
I remember that.
Yeah, when they hired Glenn Gulletson, that was the story. They sent Connie out to Vancouver and they ran the mountain. So that's how he interviewed him.
That's
right?
a Conroy story.
It is no, that's exactly it, right? You know, I don't know, is Kirk Muller, you know, we go down this laundry list of internal candidates. I don't hear his name that much. I just wonder if Kirk's kind of in the eyes of the hockey world, not me, but the hockey world, if he's now, you know, he's now an associate coach. That's
yeah, and he's, you know, he's the veteran guy in Carolina, right? Like, so if you're following the Nick Kiprio school, then, and it's not just Nick, it's like
no, but it's the old
school.
school.
Then,
Yeah,
you know, he's the guy, and Craig's a new GM.
Yeah.
But I think the thing is that Craig will, and he should makes the decision that he knows, like he knows all of them.
Mm-hmm.
He knows what he wants to build,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think that it really comes down to that, like. Is Ryan Huska qualified? Yes. Is Mitch Love qualified? Yes. Kirk Muller qualified? Yes.
And I feel
Will
like
Alex Tongue be a head coach one day?
Yeah.
Yes. But I think it's going to be from what Craig has seen. And he's a good judge of character, I think. He had Dion figured out.
He did. No, hey, look, you know, he's been around a lot of things that have worked. He's the guy that brought Johnny Gaudreau back from Boston College. You know, he's, you know, I remember running in when I was still over at CSEC. I remember running into him one day and who's this, like last year, who's this Walker Dewar? Oh, and he went on and on and on. And I made the mistake of saying, well, will he play? And Craig, well, why'd you think we signed him? Right? Like he got offended. He just should have. He should have. It was a dumb thing for me to say. You think he'll ever play? Yeah, no, we signed these kids because we don't think they're going to play. Again, he's done all of those pieces. Carla McLeod, though, I feel like I've let her down a bit because I brought her name up early in this conversation. I think it's about time that organizations start talking to her.
Oh my goodness, yes,
right.
She's an incredible coach. What she did with the Czech Republic is just
2 years.
Or Czechia, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Is like, and in terms of like how she coaches and how, like, oh my goodness, yes.
And she's done it openly. Like it's been out there for the whole world to see. The cameras have been allowed in. She shared it. She's talked about it. And yes, I get it. She can't come in and be a head coach because old man thinking, but talk to her, like give her this is now. I heard her speak at a conference and she said she wants to coach in the women's game. She's not that interested in coming over to the men's game. And we're going to get into that in a second, kind of changing that you know, because we still have that gender issue. Well, you got to, you know, to be at the top, you got to be in the men's game, not in the women's game. And I think she was pushing back against that, but I'd be interviewing her.
Yeah, I think that absolutely. I think the other thing is that you could bring her in as an assistant coach and she'd be amazing tomorrow. Right.
Well, if you bring in Dustin Wolf, you bring in Mitch Love, who's going to coach?
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Like there's
at some point we got to get the guardrails or the blinders off and start putting people in positions to be successful and giving them the opportunities.
Well, Dr. Wickenheiser, for example.
Yeah.
Like Haley Wickenheiser, like of all the athletes I've covered.
But pick a lane. Are you going to be a doctor? Or are you going to be in hockey? Which is it?
Well, the fact that
because she's an emergency, isn't she an ER doctor?
She is, but if you're an ER doctor, you can work one shift a month. You can do whatever. She's in hockey because she wants to be in hockey.
Yeah.
All I'm saying is whatever Haley wants to do. Maybe Haley doesn't want to do that, but if Haley did want to do it, she to me is it's hard to describe someone's intelligence, but like she to me was the brightest, sharpest person I ever interviewed of any gender, of anything. Like she went against the IOC. Like she's amazing. So if she wants to be a GM, I think she should be.
I'm about to say something that I hope does not come off the wrong way. So protect me on this.
Yes, I will.
Is it that she was a superstar and so much better? It reminds me a little bit of, don't you have to take with a grain of salt like Gretzky or Jordan, because they are so much better than their peer group that is it, Gretzky, when he was coaching in Arizona, was that a challenge for him? Because go do this. I can do this. Why can't you do this? I think she'd be, and again, it's a terrible thing to say. I just wonder why not Haley Wickenheiser so far, right?
Well, Haley has been at medical school, and you're right.
Yeah.
Like where is Haley? Like, Haley could do anything. Like Haley could be in charge of the Canadian Olympic Committee,
But
or
can she put a good fourth line together?
She could put she could. I think she could.
Okay.
I don't know if I make Haley. I don't know if I make Haley a head coach. Because you're talking about like delivery and stuff like that, Haley will tell you exactly the way it is. Like Haley is
maybe
very
that's
direct.
a better way of what I just fumbled
Like
through for the last 2 minutes.
Haley is very, very direct.
I think Carla and Haley are not the same coach.
No, not at
Okay,
all.
okay.
No, not at all. But
Okay.
Haley, if you're talking about building a hockey team,
Yeah.
and like who do we need,
Yes.
and who we need to draft, and what do we need to do?
Yeah.
Haley, I think Haley would be up there with anyone. Do I want Haley behind my bench? Not sure. And I'm not sure she'd want to. Do I want her treating me if I end up in the hospital? Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I so badly butchered that because you said exactly what I was thinking. Was not sure as the coach. But
I don't think Gretzky. When I covered Gretzky in Phoenix, I don't think.
That was the point I was trying to make.
coached.
It just felt awkward. It felt like he was doing it because he had to do it, not because he wanted to do it.
No, he was joyless. He was joyless when I was.
Whereas I watch, and when I interact with Carla McLeod comes to superheroes. I keep forgetting I got you here right here. You can back me up on this. She comes to superheroes. She's led Czechia to back-to-back medals they've never had before. Arguably the best coach in hockey right now. She comes out on Sunday at superheroes.
Yeah.
And can relate to those kids.
Absolutely.
And can relate to the best players in the world.
Yeah.
Not everybody can do that. Not everybody can do that. Right? Not everybody can do that.
So my son's first hockey when he played in, and he goes in and he's playing hockey and he's terrified and he's stressed out, and I'm trying to put on his skates. And to be honest, I don't have a ton of strength in my hands.
Yep.
Right. So I'm trying to tighten them up and I'm fighting with them. And Carla comes over and says, I'll help you today.
Yep.
But from now on, this is your job.
Yep.
And I know it's something simple as like tying up somebody's skates, but it was like, I'll show you the easiest way to do it if you don't have strength in your hands.
Yeah.
But next week, it's yours.
Yeah.
And that's just like one small thing. But if you read it, that actually ties in with everything that she did with Jackie. Like she is a coach.
Right. No, and again, I hope she's getting at least talked to. It was funny to me about this whole thing, and I don't know if I bought into it as much as some of our peers did, but they gotta interview all kinds of general managers and then ask them how they're doing it. They're like, well, what do you like? I understand that you can interview somebody from Carolina and you can ask them about what they do, but I'm not sure I bought into this whole premise that, a general manager search is more of a best practices exercise. We'll go out and gather best practices. And if that's the case, then if that's true, then you bring Carla McLeod in and talk to her, because you're not going to, if that's true, that's what you're doing, then you're going to get the best practices from her, right? In coaching right now.
Yeah, it's worked.
It's worked.
And I disagree with, like, sometimes people are like, oh, the women's game is so different than the men's game. It's people.
It's people. It's
and
people.
You have the different personalities and the different, but it's people.
No, and Billy Jaffe was on this program a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about this, and he, former Michigan guy, and he's been around the game. He said it best: it's talking to people, not talking down to people. That's the biggest adjustment we have to make. Is that coaching used to be talking down to people. It's what you said before about the employers we had, and the kids today. They can't be talked down to them. You have to talk at them, right?
And with them. Yeah, like when I'm teaching, that's the same thing. It's not the same. I'm going to do this lecture and you're going to hang on my every word for 2 hours, and then I'm going to test you and see if you know what I said. Mm-hmm. It's more, I'm going to help you learn how to do this, and we're going to do this together so that when you're done, you can go out and do it. And I already value your opinion. I already value what you have to say. Your life experience is different than mine.
Yep. And that's the way it's changed. Not as a throwaway, because we did want to talk about this, but there was a story that you were on with CBC yesterday talking about. I think it's in its 4th or 5th year.
Second year, yeah.
Second year?
Yep.
I thought it was 4th or 5th year.
Second.
Okay. Anyway, the CFL's program for exposing female candidates in coaching and general management, right?
Yeah, and just in football roles. So what they're doing is each team hires a woman to work during training camp. And, they've been strength and conditioning coaches. They've been, some of them are coaching. Calgary has a woman from Okotoks right now who's helping with the linebackers. And it's a way to get women exposed to football, because here I'm saying that Craig should hire who he knows and who he knows is the right person to do that. Well, it's hard to get in that door if like you can't even show anyone what you have.
Yeah.
And so that's what this program is designed to do, is to give women a chance to be exposed and be around the game, but also hopefully lead to career opportunities down the road.
So let me ask you, is it enough, or are we misreading the story that it's a start?
It's a start.
It's got to start somewhere, right?
It's got to start somewhere. So to me, when I met you, Rob, back in 2001, like Joanne Ireland also covered football in Edmonton, and Lisa Miller, but outside of the media world, there are almost no women around the game, except for if they were in office jobs.
Yep.
So there might be in the ticket office or in administration, that kind of thing. But otherwise, there were zero women around.
Yep.
And, I would go to McGill and the Alouettes games, nowhere to go to the bathroom. No, it was completely zero.
Yep.
So I think it's great that we're getting, should we do more? Absolutely. Absolutely.
See, and this brings me to one of my points that I do pride myself at being an ally, but I think sometimes this gets misconstrued. Should I be more excited about a program like this in the CFL, or should I be more excited about a program like this in high school and bantam football? It seems to me that if we truly want to make change on DEI, that we need to do it at the base of the pyramid, not at the top of the pyramid, and that box checking can sometimes take place at the top of the pyramid. That we can put people in positions and say, look at us, rather than should we not be building the base of the pyramid and pushing them up through the system?
And I would say that in some places, like for example in Winnipeg, that's already happening. Like
is it?
Yes, like women. Like my niece is a star running back, tackle football, 15 years old in Winnipeg.
Okay.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And you have officials who are doing, like, absolutely. Should you go in just because of your gender? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
And you're it's wasting everybody's time.
Right.
But if there's people who have that ability and they know the game and they, why not?
And please understand, I'm not pointing at anybody involved in the CFL story. I'm just saying, I agree.
That, like we have to build it up all the way through. And I think it's beginning to happen, but traditionally, it's not a sport that was marketed to women to play.
No.
And young girls to play.
No.
Also interesting, I went to Monday Night Football. I covered, I think 2004, 2005 in Miami. So it was quite a while ago. Dolphins versus Eagles.
Okay.
One woman in the press box. Me.
Okay.
Hundreds of men.
Yeah.
So even there in football, it was even hard as a woman to get, because football was the best thing.
Yep.
And so there was a ceiling there that.
Yeah.
If you go into an NHL press box, you would never just see one woman out of hundreds in a Stanley Cup final.
Not today, you mean?
Even back then, you would not have seen, because in the American markets where hockey was number 5 on the depth chart,
right. Okay.
then that was
by the way, you get to cover this.
By the way, we don't really care about hockey, so you can cover it.
Gotcha. Okay. So what do we need? What's the next level of this?
I think they need to keep building this. I think you're right. I think they need to do it at the grassroots level. I think they need to get more involved. Like, why can't women be officials? Of course they can.
Yes.
Right?
Why can't they be coaches?
Yes. So I think it's encouraging and opening those doors and making the opportunities real.
Yeah.
Like, instead of just a box ticking exercise. And I mean, I would rather the league hire 5 people or 4 people for the whole year than 9 for 1 month during training camp.
Yep.
Because I've seen guest coaches during training camp who do nothing. And I'm not saying that that's what's happening here, but
no. I know what you're saying.
But actually having people who are actually in there for a full season, I would rather see that.
Yeah.
And qualified people, but I I'd love to see that.
Yeah, and I've said it before. I'll say it again. I think we're fortunate because we live in a city with lots of really good female leaders.
Yep.
And accomplished female leaders, and I'd say our teams have lots of, Melissa Blades just ran the Roughnecks to, win a game of the NLL final, and
that was incredible.
Candice Gowdy, to me, Candice Gowdy's ready to take over any job in sports right now. I'm particularly fond of Amy Bontorn with the Hitmen, who I worked with for a number of years. Like, I take a lot of pride in that. I think there's going to be some game breakers and game changers that come out of this city. I really do.
Yeah, for sure. But football still seems to be a bit of football has been
because there isn't
one
and
to go.
All due respect to the Rage, God bless them. I get that, but there isn't that, college and, that same equality there. We're only now starting to get a bit of it in hockey, right?
Yeah, and my niece, who's like, honestly, she's a tank. She's incredible. You should see her film, but she has to switch to.
You should see her film. I love that. How often do you should see my niece's film?
She sends it to me. It's crazy.
Oh,
it's like
awesome.
Joffrey Reynolds, right? But my point is that she has to switch to rugby if she wants to get a college scholarship.
Right.
She doesn't have a choice.
Right.
That's what she has to do.
Right. That's the issue yet. We still got to overcome that.
Yeah. So she has nowhere to go.
Right.
Don't tell her I said that.
I'm not sure I've ever introduced you. We just went a million miles from the get-go. This was fantastic. Anything we need to plug? Anything you're up to? Anything you want to let us know about? That's usually what a guest does on this show. They come in and plug something in lieu of, an hour of yelling at me.
Parachutes for pets.
Parachutes for pets. Cool.
Yeah. Parachutes for pets. That's the
AJ's now, you and AJ are now ambassadors.
Yeah. That's a cause that's, means a lot to us. So, and what those people are doing, we lost our dog, 16 years old, in March, and that was hard for us, very hard. And he meant the world to us and means the world to us. So we've been doing that. And I understand that there might be a superheroes tournament in town.
I understand. I might be speaking to part of the organizing committee, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, so I think that's going to be great for people to come out and see. Superheroes is a program for people with neurodevelopmental disabilities or challenges that might prevent them from playing hockey. My son plays hockey because of that program and would not play hockey otherwise. And so the idea is to play against other teams and see the miracles that happen every Sunday that we get to see, and maybe we even start to take for granted because they're right in front of our eyes. I said it on Monday. One of the cool parts is that we're now getting to the point where, you mentioned Parachutes for Pets, but we took Noah and Harrison to the Flames golf tournament last week, and they raised $1,700 for CP Kids. So our hockey program's doing what all the hockey programs are doing, which is giving back to the community, which the kids are getting out and being part of their community. Like, there's nothing that these kids can't do. There's nothing. And it's like, it's okay to be different. Absolutely. We're all different and we all have different things, but we can all, like, there should, I guess maybe this is the theme, is there shouldn't be parts of society that are closed off to us. Nope. So if you have a child with autism and that child wants to play hockey, let's open the door and let them play hockey. Absolutely. If you have a teenage girl and she wants to play football, maybe you might be worried about concussions, but we got film. We got film. Oh, it's crazy. I love that. By the way, AJ also an accomplished baseball player. And lacrosse player. Yeah, hats up to the Autism Asperger's Friendship Society and their lacrosse program and Challenger Baseball. Like, there are so many things. It's the best. I thought when my son was diagnosed with autism, honestly, it felt like every door had just been slammed in our face, when really all it was a whole bunch more doors were going to open. I just didn't see them. That's the best. That is the best. We will end on that because there's nothing I can say that's better than that. Thanks, Vicki. This was fun. Thanks so much for having me. Vicki Hall, brought to you by Ski Cellar Snowboard. SkiCellarSnowboard.com. 76 years in Calgary. Currently, the location open for the summer is McLeod Trail by Chinook Center, but don't worry, the other 3 locations will come back in the fall. Coming up on Friday's show, we have a long time. This is kind of cool. We get media people in. We talk to media people about these, but we're bringing in a longtime season ticket holder and a guy that doesn't mind sharing his opinion. So Anthony Cox is going to come in representing fans on Friday about the Calgary Flames. Looking forward to that as well. Eric Dahachuk will join us in his regular Friday show. Thanks, gang. Peter Maher, Vicki Hall. Doesn't get any better than this. As a matter of fact, we might just end it here. This is the show that we're going to put on our headstone. On our headstone. This is the one we want everybody to watch. We will see you Friday.
Before we go, Gavin, our outstanding producer, this is his last show, and he's going to pass the baton to Jack. Ecstatic to have Jack, but really, really, really want to go and thank Gavin for being just a huge, huge help for the last couple of months, stepping into the breach when we needed it. He's just an amazing guy, and I wish the best for him, and hopefully we'll hook up in the future. So with that said, see you on Friday, everybody.
When there's two sides to every coin, then there's a conversation you can join. But I'm an old dog and there's new tricks, and some of my opinions you just can't fix. 'Cause I'm an old man yelling at the sky. I'ma shake my fist at the clouds and cry. Get off my lawn, you snowflake, before I have a meltdown, breakdown, shakedown. 'Cause this is my hometown, so back down, sports clown. It's all just a game, and it's the last down, let down, cowtown. I said it's all just a game. I give the touchdown.